Hello guys, this is Jack, and today we're going to be talking about One Battle After Another. This is the new Paul Thomas Anderson film. I'm going to be talking about this film for a few minutes because I did actually see this film a couple days ago, twice, as I'm recording this video, and I kind of want to talk about this movie because right now we're kind of in the middle of the high praise with this film, and I think it's definitely a good time to really talk about some of the themes and just the overall narrative of the film. So let's kind of dive into it, and if I do get into spoiler territory, I'll sound the alarm, and yeah, I'll give you some leverage with the spoilers. But yeah, let's dive into One Battle After Another. So One Battle After Another is basically a thriller starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tiana Taylor and Benicio del Toro and Sean Penn and other smaller characters. And basically you have these group of people who are on both sides of the political spectrum. You have the far left, who is a revolutionary gang called the French 75. Leonardo DiCaprio plays an explosive expert named Bob, or Ghetto Pat. His code name is Ghetto Pat. And Ghetto Pat falls in love with Beverly Hills, played by Tiana Taylor. And they have a baby, and the baby grows up to be Willa, played by Chase Infinity. And Willa kind of brings the energy of the streets, and basically this whole film is just about the clash between protesting and the right way and the wrong way to do it, but also at the same time in the background you have this really intense thriller dealing with a father and daughter who are split together, and the daughter has to kind of come back to her own senses as she's being kidnapped by a military man played by Sean Penn. Lockjaw is the character. And from there, you have this whole nearly 3-hour thriller set in a sanctuary city between US and Mexico City. And the whole entire film is completely in this area, and you're following all these characters as they're trying to get what they want and continue their own battles. So let me start from the get-go. I think this film is just, oh my God, this is just one of the best films of the year, hands down. And I say this because it's taking us back to what filmmaking used to be. And usually I say this all the time when we get these types of films, it ain't like it used to be, A lot of the films as of late have kind of just been, IP slop. Films that haven't, really brought back the energy of the 90s and the 2000s. And Paul Thomas Anderson, he's one of those directors who is always going to bring that type of energy to his filmmaking, and this is another one where it's just yeah, he does it again, and it's more accessible and it's more streamlined compared to his other films of the past couple years. So when you say this film isn't, what's the word? It's not accessible, or it's not for a general audience, I disagree, because this is actually one of the most general public movies that I've seen in the past couple years. It's very straightforward. The political themes are very streamlined and pretty easy to follow. And even then, some of the characters that you follow, there's a moral kind of compass with their way of thinking, especially with Bob, who he grows up later in the film as this guy who's just kind of reclusive and isn't doing much with his protesting and just overall mantra of the French 75. Instead, he's just sitting around smoking weed, drinking, and just complaining about his own life, but he isn't taking any action. So the daughter has to do the heavy lifting. So when the daughter gets kidnapped by Lockjaw, played by Sean Penn, that's where the film kind of really focuses on the clash between protesting and doing the right thing, or doing the thing that you should be doing instead of sitting around and complaining about the world. And I think PTA totally understands that. He really throws you into that territory without any hand holding or just throwing exposition around. I will say this, the first 30 minutes is just, it's so fucking perfect. There's a really crazy suite of just montages where you're following all these characters in the beginning, Tiana Taylor, Leonardo DiCaprio, Regina Hall, Alana Haim. They all come into this mix in the first 30 minutes, and it really sets the stage of their battles between the military and just the overall government. And then eventually, after the 30 minutes elapse, you get to see Willa be, this woman who's trying to continue the legacy of her mother. And then, the film continues into this kind of like chase back and forth between the military and the police, as Bob is being chased by the police and the military, and he's just like running around the city trying to, stay away from the cops, and it turns into like a GTA situation where he's on 5 stars throughout the whole thing. But yeah, like the first 30 minutes, I want to like highlight that because it really like sets the stage for like the movie. And then eventually, after the 30 minutes kind of like elapses, you totally understand all the emotions of all the characters and where they're at in this world. And let me start by saying Leonardo DiCaprio in this film is just, oh my God. I think he's fucking great. I don't know if he's like top 5, best of his performances in his career. I gotta like think on that, but I think as far as the last couple years, yeah, definitely. It's right up there with like Wolf of Wall Street, Killers of the Flower Moon, those type of like roles that really like get under your skin, but also at the same time you can kind of like relate to what his character is doing. And Bob is just like a guy who's a stoner and he smokes a lot of weed and he's just very paranoid, but also at the same time you kind of understand why he is that way, because his daughter was kidnapped. So it's also another kind of like layer to this film where basically the idea of protesting doesn't really fully, get going until something happens in your personal life. Something has to be taken away from you, in order to actually go out in the streets and actually like do something. And I think the film actually really portrays that perfectly. And there is a moment like in the beginning of the movie where Bob actually says something about freedom and how freedom, it's right there, but it can be taken away in a matter of minutes. And Bob's freedom was just like literally taken away once Willa is kidnapped by Sean Penn. And let me also continue with the performances, because Sean Penn is just on another level. I think he's just playing himself, because when you do watch like Lockjaw, Sean Penn, as he's just, chewing up the scenery, there's also moments where you feel kind of like intense with his character, but also at the same time you laugh at him because he's just a macho dude who thinks he knows better, but he really doesn't. And it's a lot of set in, reality, because there's a lot of people who operate like this. Racists, homophobes, pedophiles, people who are just fucking crazy in the streets, but in the sheets they're something else. And that's basically Lockjaw's character. He almost felt like Vince McMahon or Vince from WWE, just the way he walks and just grunts around. And he also has like this RFK Jr. kind of tics with his mouth.
I don't know. I mean, the answer to that is I don't know.
And he's just like having a ball. Like, I gotta like give it a hand to Sean Penn. I also have to give a hand to Benicio del Toro, who plays the mediator, the sensei of this whole situation. And he's just a guy who's just into karate, but also at the same time, he really helps all the characters kind of like ground themselves in reality while the chaos is happening in the background. And I think Benicio del Toro does another fucking great performance. It's like he got out of the Phoenician Scheme, Wes Anderson's film, and did the same thing here, where he's just, doing like the weird kind of offbeat, kind of relaxing character type, but also at the same time, he's just chill, man. And I really like his performance in this. And I really like also Regina Hall and Tiana Taylor. They're not in it that much, unfortunately, but even then, like every time they're on screen, like they are just magnetic. And PTA does a really great job with these characters, kind of letting them play around like this playground. And I'm just really excited to see more Chase Infinity, because Chase Infinity, like her performance in this, her debut performance, that in my personal mind, I think she was on like a TV show from a year ago. I don't remember, but as far as film, like you gotta like put yourself in her shoes, because her performance in this movie is just magnetic, intense, and just one of those performances where you just really feel everything on the screen. And I would also say, again, the same thing with like Tiana Taylor, who goes toe-to-toe with Sean Penn in the beginning of the movie. And from her first scene, you really like understand a lot of the stuff that she's trying to do with her character. And she's just great, man. As far as just like the rest of the movie goes, it does have like this lull in the middle of the movie, but even then it does pick up into the third act, where it turns into like this really crazy car chase at the end, which kind of reminded me a bit of Wages of Fear, Midnight Run. There's a lot of like William Friedkin meets Stanley Kubrick meets a little bit of like Robert Altman, because I actually just tweeted it out. It was basically like bits of like William Friedkin, Robert Altman, and Stanley Kubrick, especially with the car chase at the end of the movie. Oh man, that was just insane, and I don't want to spoil it here, but it's one of those like car chases that I think will probably be topped as like one of the best car chases that have been put onto film in quite a while, maybe since Baby Driver. But yeah, man, like this movie was just gas, straight gas. I don't need to kind of explain further into the movie, because if I do, I will, get into spoiler territory. But you know what? I think I should. So spoiler alert, let's kind of dive a little bit deeper into this movie. So basically, the last third of this movie is kind of just a whole like spectacle of just emotions, where basically Lockjaw is in this kind of group called the Christmas Adventurers, and he's trying to like get into the group because it has a lot of like strict rules. But mostly the whole point of this movie is basically highlighting how Lockjaw fucked up in his own mind, because he basically knocked up Tiana Taylor's character Beverly Hills, and it's a whole thing where they have an interracial baby, and the interracial baby grows up to be Willa, and Willa is being raised by Bob, and Bob doesn't know that Lockjaw is actually the father, and it basically turns into a whole situation where this white supremacist is, doing crazy shit in the streets, but in the sheets he likes the black pussy. And then, the third act happens, and Lockjaw is trying to, move Willa around as Lockjaw kidnaps Willa, puts her in this like area in the rendezvous section of the desert, and it's a whole thing where Bob is trying to find the rendezvous point, and he doesn't know the code words of some of the stuff that has been given to him in the handbook from 16 years ago, and there's a whole like section where he's just crashing out, and he's at a moment where he just can't figure out what the time is. Eventually he finds that answer after, talking to one of his friends, who is played by Dijon, the artist Dijon, which I didn't know until after watching the movie twice. I was just like, who is that guy? And it turns out it's actually Dijon, the artist who dropped one of the best albums of the year. Side note, you should really listen to that. But yeah, Dijon says like, hey, what's my favorite, type of pussy? And Bob is just like, Mexican hairless. And yeah, that actually helps find, the rendezvous point. So then Bob finds the rendezvous point, gets, a rifle from his friend, his sensei, and tries to kill Lockjaw from afar, but doesn't do it, and it doesn't work out. And then, Lockjaw eventually tries to traffic Willa to this other guy, who in the beginning is also hired to hit Lockjaw. Some of his goons is supposed to like hit Lockjaw, because they find out like Lockjaw actually had a relationship with Beverly Hills, and the baby, is black, and it's a whole thing where this white supremacist group is just like, that's not gonna fly, so we gotta kill you, but we're not gonna say it, we're just gonna, do it in the background. And eventually everything turns into like this really intense car chase at the end, where the whole kind of like metaphor of the entire situation is just everything coming into waves. And Sensei really says that in the beginning of the movie, where Bob and Sensei are like at the karate gym, and Sensei's just like, hey, just like calm down a little bit, breathe in, breathe out. Everything is in like ocean waves, just breathe as like it is. And the whole film basically has that like metaphor or that personification where everything is coming in waves. You have like all these action sequences that are like coming in waves, and then Willa, who eventually steals a car and drives off to the highway, has to kind of stop and go while this hitman who is trying to kill Lockjaw is trying to also kill everybody on this road. So Willa eventually kind of like drives on this road, and it's like hilly, and she's going like in and out through like these roads and kind of breathing in and out and trying to like see where to stop, so the bodyguard or the hitman crashes into the car and eventually the guy gets murdered by Willa with a gun, and the film basically turns into a whole heroic situation where Willa saves the day and Bob also finds Willa at that point. And yeah, the film basically ends with Lockjaw walking off from his injuries, who he basically, before the movie ends, he was like shot by the hitman. But then eventually Lockjaw gets into the group, the Christmas Adventurer, white supremacist group, and he thinks he has it all, but soon as he walks into like his new office, he gets gassed and he dies. And the film ends with kind of like the sweeping montage of like Willa and Bob kind of like hugging each other and really kind of like understanding like their troubles over the past few hours, but also at the same time them kind of like figuring out that continuing the mantra of like the French 75 is a good thing, and it's also a thing that should be continued through nonviolence, just mostly, you know, protesting and really kind of giving yourself out there to the world. And I think the way the film ends is just, it's fucking perfect. And I know it's like kind of rushed when you watch it for the first time, but after seeing it a second time, I think the film is just, it's beautiful, and it's a beautiful ending. And it really sets the stage for like what is happening right now in America. Just the way we're kind of like sitting around and like doing nothing and kind of like have kind of a feeling of just dread and just doubt about the future. But I think PTA, like his direction in his film is just immaculate, and he really kind of like shows all those themes in mind without any exposition and just fluff. So yeah, that's like the spoiler kind of like territory of the movie. And I think, again, all the performances are great. I think Sean Penn is going to get his next Oscar for this movie. He might fight it off with like Stellan Skarsgård and Adam Sandler, but honestly, I think it's in the bag. And I would say Benicio del Toro can come along with like the supporting actor nod, and Leonardo DiCaprio is definitely going to get a nomination for this movie. And I could also say Chase Infinity, if the Best Casting Award is truly, you know, a real thing for this film. But yeah, overall, I'd give this a 5 out of 5, or, you know, a 10 out of 10. Like, this is easily one of the best films of the year, and it's like worth the hype. I know a lot of people are like overhyping the movie because of just the way it's coming out. It's very timely. It's a new PTA movie, and everything is true, everything is real, and deserves like everything that it's getting towards as far as praise. Going deeper into like the Oscars, I think this is like win territory for Best Picture. Might have to fight off with like Sentimental Value and Hamnet, but we'll see about that. But I think One Battle After Another is basically the populist movie, but also the movie where cinephiles and, you know, general public people can like get along with it. Maybe aside from, you know, people who are really deep into like those really shitty conservative video essays on YouTube, who, you know, always complain about everything is woke, but that's another discussion to be had. But I think this film is very broad, it's very general public pleasing, and I think it's one of those films that definitely works for everybody. Even though if you don't like kind of like general themes of the movie, if you have problems with it, even then you're just gonna be, you know, in awe with like the filmmaking and like the action and the acting in this film. But I think I kind of want to like dive a little bit deeper into why I think this film could potentially actually get a Best Picture win. And I think we kind of have to like start with like the box office potential, because this is basically kind of like the return of like the box office kind of spectacle, where a lot of the headlines for this movie in terms of like box office returns is coming back to me as like the thing that happened a few months ago with Sinners, where Sinners was in this like same position where it was tracking to kind of like do a modest box office return. Maybe I think it was like sub 50 million, if I remember correctly. And a lot of the trades were kind of like, hey, like it might flop. I don't know if this is going to work out. Ryan Coogler is going to make the movie flop and all that. And then, you know, the movie came out and it did numbers. Like everybody came out for it. It got a lot of money, and Warner Brothers is now pushing it to be its Best Picture potential nominee. And this is literally the same thing with One Battle After Another, where you're seeing a lot of like the trade articles, you know, accusing of it being, you know, too highly budgeted, which it is, but it's definitely worth it because of like the practical effects and just the general vibe of the movie, and just also the way it's shot with VistaVision and film, so it makes sense. And also at the same time, Leo is not a guy who doesn't do anything for cheap. So yeah, like it feels like real with like the box office budget for the film, or the film budget. But yeah, like the articles that I've been seeing, especially on like the Reddit, like the box office Reddit, it's just been like shitty. Like, not gonna like all the like people on like box office Reddit are just lunatics. Like they just want to like accuse this movie of being, you know, a film where it's too high budgeted, which it is, but it's not gonna like make its money. It's not gonna have legs. It's not gonna be a thing where general public people are gonna like it, and all of that is wrong except for the high budget accusations. But I think this film could definitely leg out, and if it does, it might have a high chance of, you know, continuing its Best Picture glory. And even then, if it does break even, I think it's a good story, and it might actually win Best Picture. And when it does, like the legs will have, you know, more longevity. And also, like the Blu-ray and VOD sales are also a thing. So I think Warner Brothers is going to like take its time releasing this movie to streaming, and when it does, it might have a second, you know, round of, you know, money. But then yet again, I feel like even with this movie, it'll have some time to, you know, catch up with its budget. And I also think the whole idea of it flopping right now, it doesn't like make sense as far as its Best Picture potential, because like even if it does flop, it has the prestige of like PTA and all the cast and the raves all across the board. So even if it does slightly flop this weekend, which it might be because it's projected to get like 25 million as I'm recording this video on Sunday. So yeah, I don't know. I think the box office, it doesn't matter in terms of awards, and I think Warner Brothers knows that. So you gotta like take that into account. And I think, again, it just will work out in its favor, in my opinion. And we'll kind of go deeper into this analysis when we talk about my current predictions for the Oscars and just like the general vibe. So yeah, that's basically it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to be seeing this movie again for a third time today, so I'm really excited. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Spread the word. I will be doing my last TIFF review in the next couple of days. There's gonna be 2 more, and then after that, I'll do a wrap up, and then I'll also talk about my Oscar predictions currently. So yeah, keep an eye out on that. Thank you guys. Peace out.